Welcome to episode 7 of the Dawn of Rebellion podcast. Thank you for being back with us. In this episode, we're going to do more Hobby on a Shoestring and go through the Ashes of Middenheim campaign from episodes 1 to episode 6. We're going to start tonight with a request from a listener on how to expand their Sons of Horus army. They've got a budget of £150 and a reasonably good starting point. Let's see what we can come up with. So last episode I asked if you had any requests on Hobby on a Shoestring. If you've got a budget or an army in mind, what would I recommend getting? And a listener, or actually somebody from the club, asked me how they would go about developing a Sons of Horus army that they'd picked up I think they got it on eBay. He's got a budget of £150 and he already has the following as part of his force. He has 16 tactical marines, 2 tactical marines with plasma guns, 2 with missile launchers, a librarian, which is the Dark Vengeance librarian that's been converted a bit, and a captain who's armed with plasma pistol and a power weapon. He's also got a dreadnought with twin-link las cannons and a power fist. Because that's not a serviceable list in Heresy, I think what they did was built the 2 Mark IV tactical squads that they had as 40k tactical squads, 8 tactical marines, and then a special weapon and a heavy weapon to make the 2 squads of 10. But obviously you can't do that in Heresy because you can't mix squads with specialist or heavy weapons unless you're doing it as a veteran, and even then that list doesn't work. So the first thing we need to do is address that issue and make it so we can actually have a playable list. So what I have done is I've recommended they buy a squad of the Forge-World Justerian with the Power Maul and Heavy Flamer upgrade kit, because you can't have Sons of Heresy without some Justerian. Another Dreadnought armed with, it doesn't really matter, but to complement the twin-link las cannons, I think you need something with a bit more spready fire. And it kind of doesn't matter, it's kind of personal flavour, but I think a Dreadnought Chain Fist and Volkite Kilverin would be really good at hacking down other Dreadnoughts, but also just carving through infantry squads. And then another Mark IV tactical squad. All 3 of those combined come in at £132.50, which will give him £17.50 change. If you can stretch a bit more, getting another tactical squad is probably not a bad idea, because you can never have enough tactical marines. But with those recommended purchases, I've come up with a 1250 point list. It's a Centurion list based on the idea that no vehicles and no flyers. So I'd use the 2 HQ choices they've already got, which is the Centurion armed with a power weapon, plasma pistol. I'd give them Artificer armor and a refractor field for a bit of durability. That'll give them a 2 up, 4 up invulnerable. A Librarian, just a level 1 Psyker with a Force Sword and Bolt Pistol, nothing too fancy. That's 95 points. 12-man tactical squad. There's a sergeant with a power fist, 160 points. 10-man tactical squad, sergeant with power fist, 140 points. The sergeant's already built, otherwise I might have chucked in some more interesting equipment there, but power fist's always a fairly solid choice. And then a 6-man tactical support squad with plasma guns. Now he's got 2, and he'll get 3rd in the Mark IV tactical squad, but he's going to have to go probably eBay fishing for the extras, especially as now as Forge World don't sell the packs of specialist weapons anymore. I'll talk about that another time, because it seems like a very strange decision to sack off all of these special weapons. Like, I could kind of get the shoulder pads, but the special weapons, unless they're bringing out plastic sets soon, which that'd be great. It seems odd that you've now just binned a huge selection of heavy and special weapons that people were buying and were using. The tactical support squad is 190. 6 guys with plasma guns, the most expensive unit there. It tells you how expensive plasma guns are. Then as an elite choice, Justerian Terminator squad, 5 dudes with power mauls and the heavy flamer. It's not the best choice, but it looks really cool. It's a really nice little upgrade kit, and some template weapons would do you well if you ended up fighting Mechanicum thralls or cults and militia lists. Just being able to slap that strength 5 template down is always useful. A Contemptor Dreadnought Talon. You can either run them individually or as a pair, depending on kind of what your plan is. You've got space, you've got multiple elite choices, so whether you have it as 1 or 2 is up to you. But one will have twin-link las cannons and a Dreadnought Power Fist with Combi Bolter, and one with a Dreadnought Chain Fist and Combi Bolter and a Volkite Kilverin. As I say, I think that would be a really good starting point. You've got 3 troop choices, you've got 2 HQ choices, good solid elite choice in the Terminators, and then the 2 Dreadnoughts providing variable fire support. I think for 1250 points, that's a pretty good way to go. And then it will just be a case of taking it from there, another 10-man box to up the tactical squads to 15 guys aside, maybe chuck a couple more into the tactical support squad, maybe turning the Centurion into a Praetor, maybe getting a Terminator captain to go with the Justarin, upping the Librarian to level 2 Psyker, maybe putting them in some special kit, Artificer armor, that kind of thing. It wouldn't take much to turn this up to a nice 1500 point list, and then start chucking in Land Raiders and Fire Raptors and stuff like that. So yeah, there you go, Zach. That's what you need to buy. You need to go and get yourself a pack of Justarin, a Dreadnought with some cool weapons, and then a Mark IV tactical squad. That's what you should spend your 150 quid on. So yeah, that's it for Zach's Sons of Horus. I've got a couple more armies I've made up. Technically, both of these kind of go over the £150 spend limit that I've imposed on myself for getting into the Horus Heresy, but not by much, and particularly the second one, you don't have to if you don't want to. So the first one I want to do is Raven Guard. I've got a Raven Guard army myself. It's actually the only army I have that's fully finished. It's all fully painted, all 3,500-4,000 points worth, and I'm really pleased with it. It looks really cool. But to get started with Raven Guard, I found this quite tricky because they're a kind of funky army, very stealthy, very sneaky. So a lot of the kind of default choices like Dreadnoughts and stuff like that just kind of, I don't think really fit. So this is what I've come up with. 2 Mark IV squads, which comes out at £46. A drop pod for £17, Dark Fury squad, which is their Vanguard veteran squad. They've all got Raven's Talons and Mark IV jetpacks with some really funky wings. Really nice models, really, really cool. I've done mine using the Perspex from a CD case to look like shattered glass and bits of Sector Imperialis scenery, so it looks like they're kind of bursting through Imperium windows. It's really cool. And then a Mordythan strike squad, which are their sniper reconnaissance kill team squad, and a Legion Moritat. The Mordythan strike squad, I'm not actually suggesting you use it as the Mordythan, I would just use it as a Legion reconnaissance squad. It's £4 more expensive to get the Raven Guard ones, but they look so much cooler than the regular Recon Marines. If you are tight for money, just get the Recon Marines, they're £36. Again, they're really lovely models, but if you're getting Raven Guard, if you've got another £4, definitely plump for the Mordythan strike squad. The Legion Moritat is not to be used as a Moritat because a Moritat can't be your compulsory HQ choice. But what you can do is just call it a captain, give it a jetpack, and then tag it in with the Dark Fury squad. There's nothing to stop you kitting out a captain with twin pistols, grenades, and a jetpack. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, don't use it as a Legion Moritat. Whether you go for the Volkite or the plasma pistols, I think the Volkite is probably a safer option for a commander who's actually going to need to stick around on the battlefield. Having your plasma guy run about and toasting things is cool until you start rolling ones. And with their rapid fire rule, you're going to be rolling ones eventually, and it can get quite messy if your very expensive commander just evaporates himself. So yeah, I would make up 2 squads of 10, stick one of them in a drop pod, use the Legion infiltrate rule to kind of push them up the field. The Dark Fury squad can deep strike along with your Legion commander, the Moritat, and then your Legion reconnaissance can set up on an objective somewhere, either at the back and just plink away with sniper rifles, or a bit further forward onto an objective that's going to be contested. That comes out at £164. If you absolutely had to stay to 150, you could just cut out the drop pod and infiltrate both squads, but I do think drop pods are quite Raven Guard, so that's why I put it in there. Second one for Horus Heresy is Death Guard. This is something I've thought about a lot. It's something I've considered doing myself on a few occasions. Death Guard are very infantry heavy, very solid, kind of grinding attritional warfare. They wade through the mud and the blood to get to the enemy and shrugging off everything and they go. So I thought it had to be very infantry heavy. So I've gone for 3 Mark III squads. Mark III Iron Armour is just way cooler for Death Guard than the Mark IV Maximus Armour. Typhon, who is the First Company captain, he's also a character series model, really, really lovely model. And to support him, I would go with a squad of Grave Warden Terminators. They are pricey, they're 50 quid. I'm not sure you should get the Death Shroud. I think in a small army, the Death Shroud, which are like Mortarian's personal bodyguard, are perhaps a bit much. They're really expensive and quite good, and perhaps in a small kind of getting started army it might not be the best idea. But the Grave Wardens have got some really cool rules and some really cool weapons, so I definitely plump for them. So all of that comes out at 155. But if you can stretch another £12.50, you can get a Death Shroud Power Scythes upgrade kit, which is about, I think it's 5 or 6 Power Scythes, which are like mini versions of Mortarians. Typhon's got one. I think one of the Grave Warden Terminators comes with one. But you could then stick them on the sergeants in the 3 Mark III squads to give them that bit of kind of reaping, Death Guardy look to them. You don't have to. You could probably kit bash something if you wanted to, but I thought for 12.50, if you're going to do Death Guard, you'd have a couple of spares when you expand the army. I thought that would be a really good idea. Winding back into 40k now, dialing the price back down to £100. I've chosen Eldari this time. That's Eldar for the old people. And I've come up with a 45 power level, which would be good as a generic starting point for Eldari. Obviously, if you want to go down a Craft World specific route, this probably isn't going to work. If you want to go same hand, for instance, they're the jet bikes and all that kind of stuff. But for a sort of good, I like the look of them. I like the feel. What would be a good core? This is what I've got. So the Start Collecting box, which gives you a Farseer, a squad of Wraith Guard, which can be made with either 2 types of D cannons, or can be made as Wraith Blades, who come with cool power swords, or Ghostglaive axes. It comes with a Wraith Lord, which is their kind of Dreadnought equivalent. A War Walker, which is a bit of a clunky choice. It's quite a cheap mobile fire base, but I don't really like the model, to be honest. It's not my favourite, but it's functional. So that comes out at 38 quid. So to support that Start Collecting box, I've gone with 2 Guardian squads, which are 33.40 for the 2. That'll give you 2 10-man squads with 2 heavy weapon platforms. Now you can make that as a one big giant 20-man squad if you wanted to, because you can have a heavy weapon platform for every 10 guys you have. But I'd split them up in small games. A squad of Dire Avengers, who are elite guardians. They're, I suppose, the closest thing to Space Marines that the Eldar have. They are just sort of generic tactical Marines. Their shuriken catapults are really hefty compared to the Guardian ones. They've got good armour, good combat skills, good solid unit. You used to get 10 in a box for the same price. You now get 5, which is a bit of a rip-off, but there we are. And then to support them, either a Warlock or a Spirit Seer. I think Spirit Seers are better for the points. They can cast an extra spell, and they're just a bit more durable, but equally, if you want to get a Warlock because the models are cooler, that's good. The Spirit Seer will, however, help you with your Wraith Guard and Wraith Lord. They can offer buffs if they're within, I think it's like 6 inches of them, with regards to some of their spells can be used to really ramp up what the Wraith constructs can do. So all of that comes out at $95.90 from Alchemist Workshop. The Spirit Seer is a back order thing. They can get you a copy, but they might not necessarily have it in stock. So you might have to wait on that one a little bit, but well worth the wait. Never leave home without a Farseer, whether it's in a jet bike or on foot. Just don't. The Eldar are very good at psychic powers. Farseers are some of the best psychics in the game. They're really well costed. Just make sure you take at least one. So that's it for Hobby on the Shoestring. After the break, I'll be talking through Ashes of Middenheim and what my group has got up to over the last few weeks.
Latest work is almost complete. All I need is a bit more oil. Where's the known oil? Confounded past Ninjatron, where is the known oil? You have one job. Fine. To the Alchemist's workshops. Do they have known oil? Yes, here it is. Excellent. I might pick up some other things whilst I'm here. Ooh, this looks interesting. Latest releases at bargain prices.
This place is great, boss.
So remember, past Ninjatron, whenever you need hobby supplies, visit thealchemistsworkshops.com.
So we finished our Ashes of Middenheim campaign a couple of weeks ago now. It was great fun. I really, really enjoyed it. The first time I played the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game was first edition, and it was a really cool campaign, but unfortunately the guy who ran it passed away very suddenly, and so we've kind of left it for quite a while. This was a good sort of 2, 3, probably even longer years ago, just because I don't know, always seemed a bit sort of too soon. But we had some new players join who were really keen. The Humble Bundle helped a lot as well. They did a Circle 7 thing with loads of second edition books, so a few of us had got that. Anyway, we ran the starter campaign mission, which comes fresh out of the rulebook, about getting from a sort of run-down frontier village town up the river to Middenheim, stopping a demonic summoning ritual en route and kind of giving characters a chance to explore the mechanics of the game. And what happened next was it was actually over 7 weeks, I think, because we missed a session, or we had to sort of stop it because not enough of us could make the week. Oh, actually, I think it was me that was away. So we had 6 sessions over 7 weeks, and I've got some notes. They're a bit sporadic, so if this is a little bit all over the place, and if I miss anything, guys, I'm sorry. But generally what happened was this. So the party arrives in Middenheim, having sort of thwarted Granny Mercer's attempts at summoning a demon or to rid the stain on her family's honour by killing the Graf. Eventually let into Middenheim, where they are sort of set up camp in one of the refugee sections, which is an old warehouse that's been converted by the local rulers who are there in place of the standard lords and ladies who are now, well, not ladies, but the standard lords and knights who are off chasing down Archaon's horde. They quickly take the icon of Sigmar to the Temple of Sigmar, where they are handsomely rewarded with some gold coins and a symbol of Sigmar. It is indeed, as the young priest told them, a holy relic, and it's a very important piece, and they're very delighted to get it back. You are then summoned, as you leave the temple, by the City Watch, and you are taken to meet the Captain Schumer, or something like that. I can never remember his name. It's one of these impronounceable ones. Anyway, the good captain gets a debriefing about the suspected beastmen attacks and the mutants' attacks on the village that the party dealt with in the previous session. About halfway through the conversation, a guard comes in, hands Captain a letter, saying that the priest you just visited has been found brutally murdered and the icon is missing. The party are immediately placed under arrest, being the last persons to see the priest, but the party was able to talk their way out of it and say, well, why would he return this icon only to kill him and take it back again? That was ridiculous. They passed some successful charm checks and, they're eventually released and recruited into the Watch to help find who was really responsible. The party then went to the Temple of Sigmar, where they investigated the dead priest's office. There were a few perception checks that went awry, which meant they missed some vital clues. They did spot that there was some scratch marks on the windowsill. The icon itself was missing, but most importantly, they noticed that the priest had been writing something, and it was just legible as an impression on the piece of paper under which he had been writing. The actual original with the inked words on it was missing. So using some charcoal, they made a rubbing and were able to determine that he was basically appraising the piece and that they thought it was a genuine relic of Sigmar and of great importance. One of the new party members who hadn't been able to do the initial adventure was playing a halfling outlaw called Jon. And Jon was a great little character. He clambered out the window and had a look around the alleyway. He thought he could see some tracks, but he wasn't 100%. There was some bait in the campaign book where there was a trail of blood leading down to a sewer, which sort of given you a first indication of what was going on. But he climbed back up, and eventually they noticed that there was a black dart in the back of his neck, which is what killed him. They took it out. Someone passed a really good knowledge check and figured out that it was poisoned, and it was probably warpstone poison. Everyone immediately went metagaming and thought, Skaven, which was correct. Party then proceeded to troop around Middenheim, going to the various different quarters and investigating things. They spoke to the Dwarven Engineering Guild, who basically told them to sod off. And what they were doing was there were 3 other dead bodies who had all been murdered with these special little black darts. And so they had to figure out if there were any sort of common themes beyond the manner of death. There was a member of the City Watch who was patrolling outside one of the temple colleges. There was a unknown man who was taken to the Gardens of Moor to be buried, and then there was a dwarf who was a doorman who was found dead. As I said, the dwarves told the party basically to go away. It's none of their business, even though we had a dwarf in the party. There wasn't sort of much love lost between them, and so he failed some charm checks and intimidation checks, and we didn't get a huge amount of information out of them. The guard, not a huge amount was relevant to the guard. I think it was there were some little bits and pieces that kind of led you to he'd been exploring a drain, or there was a drain nearby. But it was the unknown man who was kind of the most interesting. The party went and discovered that as they were preparing him for burial, 3 guys walked in and immediately paid for him to have a full honoured Sigmarite burial. Although they didn't leave any names, they left sort of a description of this tall guy with a scar on his face. And when the priests took the party to see the gravestone, one of them passed an excellent knowledge check to realise that he was a member of the Ordo Fidelius, which is a proper, like, hardcore fanatic witch hunters guild who are devout worshippers of Sigmar and whose existence is all about hunting down chaos and heresy wherever they can find it. This is significant because the Ordo Fidelius play quite an important role in the first part of the campaign. The roundabout way is they discovered a trail into the sewer systems that sort of run all over Middenheim, and they find a grate that has been very carefully cut open and then has been sort of replaced, and they've rubbed sort of dirt into the scratches and stuff like that to blend it in. So the party informed the watch. They got kitted out from the watch stores, so a few of them took helmets and chest plates and stuff like that. And then with the help of I can't remember what the job profession was, but yeah, one of the guard watchmen was a former sort of sewer cleaner type who agreed to show them round. So they got their lanterns and off they went. Jon had a bit of an independent streak and almost got eaten by a giant rat, but they managed to kill it before it dragged him under the sewage. A few of them failed some willpower checks and were at some disadvantages just because of the stink. But eventually they found their way into a Skaven lair. The combat was quite brutal. A few of them took a couple of wounds, but eventually they did carve their way through kind of the general clan rats. But Gustav, who was the other member of the party who couldn't do the starter session, who was a Kislevite warrior, took a manticore venom dart to the neck. Now, I've said before in one of the earlier episodes that this system is really brutal. You can die very, very quickly, and this was almost over too quickly for him, because manticore venom, you have to first roll a willpower check, otherwise you fall asleep, and then you have to pass a toughness check, and if you fail that, your character is dead. Not incapacitated, dead, just dead. And thankfully he passed his willpower test, so he didn't fall asleep. But that could have been the end of Gustav in session 1. And after that, the party had a sort of healthier respect for just quite how horrendous this game could be. So the master assassin who'd been chucking these darts around eventually engaged the party in the back of the tunnels. He died surprisingly fast, if I remember rightly. He got cleaved in half. As they had a bit of a rummage round the lair, they found the frame of the icon, although the icon itself was missing. A few of the party decided to kind of have a rummage through the Skaven beds, which is not advised, as they caught some deeply unpleasant itchy skin disease. Thankfully, when they returned the icon's frame back to the Temple of Sigmar, the priest, Father Odo, was able to perform various sort of healing hand type spells and managed to rid them of the clap or whatever it was. And yeah, that was the end of the first session. The party enjoyed it. They got on with it, and yeah, it was a good setup for the second session. The second session saw the party leaving Middenheim, being guided by the visions of Father Odo. He had this nightmare about a bronze skull beneath a herdstone deep in the Drakwold woods, which are the forest sort of southeast-ish of Middenheim. And this was just sort of your standard sort of scary vision, blood raining from the skies and all very Khorne and this, that and the other. Anyway, the party is tasked by the Archlector to basically hunt down and retrieve this object before it could fall into the hands of a kind of worthy chaos champion and wreak his vengeance across Middenheim. So the party, I gave them a couple of options. The campaign itself just sort of says, it takes a few days to get there, make it interesting. So I gave them 2 choices at the crossroads and some kind of sub-quests to do. Guardsmen at the gate asked if they could check in on their parents at a nearby village. There was, I can't remember exactly what else, there were a few other things this way and that. Anyway, they headed southeast and passed through a battle scene, which was fairly horrific, all sorts of carnage. And they found a deeply wounded man who they could have saved, but chose not to because it would have required the use of one of their few healing potions, and they decided that they were just going to put this guy out of his misery, which was fairly bleak, but it was what they chose. A few of them scavenged some bits of kit. The elven thief, Kirillith, managed to find a longbow. I secretly rolled a d10 to see how many shots it had left in it, because it was damaged in the battle, and he rolled a 6. I didn't tell him this. But when he'd fired his 6th shot later in the session, I said, your bow breaks, which was not opportune at that particular time. On the other side of the battlefield was a ruined coaching inn, and the party was able to find a bit of shelter, but they also discovered an old man and his granddaughter, I think it was, hiding in the cellar. There was a bit of disagreement on what to do with them, but eventually they just left them on their own. Some people wanted to sort of rob them blind of whatever they had. A few people wanted to lock them up. Somebody wanted to kill them. I think Jon was just at the back picking apples. As they got closer and closer to the skull's lair, Father Odo's visions get more and more disturbing, and eventually he starts to sort of lose his mind. The character rolled some good willpower checks, otherwise he could have quite quickly gone insane. As the party reached the herdstone, a sort of monolithic statue surrounded by bones and skulls and stuff like that, left there by beastmen tribes, they spotted a minotaur which was guarding the entrance to the tomb. The party took a direct approach to this, which was quite surprising, really. They flanked him either side and then sort of coordinated shots with the arrows and a crossbow and charging. Luckily for them, they were able to put the Minotaur down before he called for too much backup. There's a mechanic where for every turn he stays alive and unengaged, he can blow his horn and more beastmen come running. They're randomly generated, and you can generate anything from sort of really wimpy gores all the way up to other Minotaurs, and I rolled poorly on that, or well as far as the party was concerned. I think they only ended up having to fight 2 more basic beastmen guys. Anyway, the party did manage that with no damage, which was lucky for them. Once they'd dispatched them, they found the entrance to the tomb, went inside, and Jon just sort of his character makes a point of just always taking the right hand path, whatever that might be. Unfortunately for him, that led him straight into a trap which almost beheaded him. There was like a sort of spiked wall swingy thing, and he just about managed to pass his agility test. I think he passed it by 3 points. Otherwise, he would have taken a very hefty, spiky damage to the brain, which might well have ended his journey there and then. The party advanced into the tomb a bit more cautiously after that. It had taken us a while to get to this point, so I had to kind of shave out a few of the enemies, but there were these kind of pools of blood and made writhing tentacles that were incredibly hard to deal with for the party, largely because they were rolling really poorly. But yeah, it took them a while to sort of batter their way through a couple of them. The main sort of centerpiece of the room was this fountain of blood, and as they stepped over the threshold without abasing themselves before Khorne, the blood started sort of showering all over them, and they took some wounds and some insanity points as a result. At the back of the room was a statue of this sort of legendary Chaos Champion, and then to the left was a trophy room where they found fragments of a broken hammer and a banner of the White Wolf, or the Knights Panther, one of the two, I can't remember, one of the sort of 2 knightly houses in Middenheim. So they wrapped them up, and then in the tomb itself was this sort of black sarcophagus that the dwarf Ragnar passed an amazing strength test and was able to heave the coffin or the sarcophagus lid off and retrieve the skull without any ill effects, which was quite impressive. That the game has quite a lot of mechanics to really make your party suffer as they're carrying this thing. Anyway, they retreat out of the tomb back into the forest and make their way, completing the circuit back to Middenheim. Spent a couple of nights in the woods where the skull would emerge from wherever they'd wrapped it up and put it away. And when one of the characters, usually Ragnar, as he was carrying it, would wake up, the skull would be sort of sat next to him, staring at him, even though he'd wrapped it in one of the knightly banners they'd found and stuffed it in the bottom of his bag. It had somehow appeared next to him. In the sort of GM notes, it says the party should be locking it in a chest and sitting on the box. They should be that paranoid of this thing by the end. On the last day, they ended up in the village that the soldier had asked them to look into inadvertently. Unfortunately, it had been burned to the ground by some particularly overzealous witch hunters. The party were almost bluffing their way out of the situation because the witch hunters wanted to know quite what they were doing here. But the skull took a moment and fell out. It's a bit like the One Ring in that respect. It wants to be found by people who are prone to bloodshed, and so the witch hunters immediately engaged the party, as sort of seeing them as heretics. Roberto, the sort of fencing duelist type, performed a proper Legolas maneuver and leapt onto the back of a horse and held the lead guy hostage. The skull has a really negative effect on horses, and as it had fell out of the bag in front of 2 of the witch hunters, their horses had failed their sort of willpower check and bucked the riders off. 2 members of the party literally just ran up and slit their throats. There was sort of no ifs or buts. It was a proper sort of coup de grace time, which brought that combat over to a fairly swift resolution. Anyway, they decided that they couldn't leave this sort of witch hunter alive and dispatched him, which posed a bit of a problem because, narratively speaking, those 3 were supposed to be the 3 that had attended the funeral of their fellow Ordo Fidelius member. So I had to kind of write them back into the story. But there we are. So, having searched the bodies, they found icons of the Ordo Fidelius and sort of stowed them away. They returned to Middenheim, informed the guard of the bad news that his whole village had been burnt down. I think one of them came up with a bit of a sad story that they'd seen tracks leading away from the village, so maybe they'll be joining you soon. And as they returned to the Temple of Ulrich, where the Archlector had sort of sent them off on this quest, they handed back over the skull and were about to take a toast to their sort of successful endeavour. And that was the end of session 2. Session 3 picks up immediately after session 2. The actual end of session 2 is a bit anticlimactic, so I did the first sort of 2 minutes of session 3 with them, where they return the skull and they are about to have a toast. They all opted to drink wine, which was good, because it turns out that the water had been poisoned. So Father Odo, who drinks the water, mutates into a chaos spawn and immediately attacks the party. They dealt with him really swiftly, but as they were exiting the offices, they hear this ruckus down the hallway and several more mutants appear. Some of them got little wings and beaks and claws and hooves and all sorts. The party wastes no time in hacking them to pieces. Before, they don't try and capture them, they don't try and interrogate them, it's just, no, cut them up, that's done, dead. Anyway, it transpires that they had all shared water from a pitcher that had been drawn from one of the wells in the temple. So the wells were sealed off. A sample was taken to one of the colleges, and the alchemists confirmed that it had been poisoned with warpstone. Since you dispatched the Skaven, there was some speculation as to, well, where is this warpstone coming from? The party rightly concluded that warpstone doesn't necessarily mean Skaven. But it quickly becomes apparent, once the Watch become informed, that maybe the poisoning was just a test, and that the city's water supply was in grave danger. The party then are tasked with stopping the poisoning of Middenheim's water source, which is a bit of an ask, considering there's about 30-something wells dotted over the city. Which one is going to be poisoned? The party had some real moments of genius. One went off to basically sort of the city planning office and managed to sort of negotiate their way past the officious Jobsworth clerk and recover the plans pointing out where all the wells in the city were. The Dwarven Engineering Guild had been tasked with repairing some of the broken wells, and they were able to give them, again through some passing charm checks this time, and especially giving the hammer back, the broken bits they'd found in the tomb, that went down well. They were able to sort of get the specs of the wells. At this point, the Ordo Fidelius leader was supposed to be the guys they met in the village, but wasn't, or was, but I had to change it so that it wasn't, arrives and offers to, he says he heard of the commotion in the Temple of Ulrich and has offered the support of the Order in guarding some of the wells. So the party shares the relevant information and then makes a bit of a deduction that, well, this particular well in the poorest slum would cause the most damage, and if you were going to look for a mutant impact to throw the city into chaos, you'd want to get as many people hit at once as you could. So the party identified this well and thought that they would, it would get hit eventually, even if it's not first. They chose well, or they chose the well, and were able to capture a cultist as he sort of slunk through the dark and was about to poison the well. I think Kirillith or Ragnar shot him through the ankle as he was running, and I had him sort of pitch forward and collapse at that point. The party interrogated him, none too kindly, good bit of torture, and he revealed that he was part of a Tzeentchian cult that was based in an old warehouse not too far away. He's got a little bag of warpstone with him, and the party head there straight away. They managed to find out that there was a guard who was on lookout behind some barrels, and they were able to, well, the plan was that they would drop in through the roof and sort of Assassin's Creed style finish this guy off. They fluffed some rolls, and comedy ensued when they sort of clattered into barrels and couldn't break the door down to get reinforcements in, and they made a hell of a noise. But eventually they were able to overcome this guard and then kind of wade into the cultists in their den beneath. We saw the introduction of magic for the first time. One of the cultists was an overly competent wizard, but he knew some magic spells, and I gave him a fire blast thing just to kind of see what happened. So he was sort of running about zapping things and setting fire to people's clothes. And Rin, the elven boatman, is an alcohol problem. and he threw a bottle of spirit into a campfire, which exploded and set 2 of the cultists on fire with splash damage. That was quite funny. So they sort of hacked and burned each other for quite a while, eventually putting the cultists down. In session 1, they had negotiated with the officers of the watch that for every Skaven they killed, they would be rewarded with some gold, and they were taking rat tails as a kind of proof of what they'd done. And this time they started carving out the tattoos that were on the back of these guys' hands, which was quite brutal, but that's what the party wanted to do. And I was like, okay, fine, that would do it. Crucially, on the altar was a kind of Libra Demonica cultist book of Tzeentch, and they recovered that. And as they set about making their way back to the Temple of Ulrich, things had gone awry. Because although they had stopped the main poisoning, a few mutant outbreaks had sprung up. And as they made their way through the city, there were a few kind of moral problems that they had to address. One was a business owner who'd been tied up with a sign saying Beastman on his neck. And it was quite obvious that the horns had been sort of tied on with string, but the party chose not to get involved. So yeah, that guy died a grisly death. A few others, they chose not to intervene, but I wanted to kind of force their hand a little bit. So I had Helga, who was the little girl that they escorted up the river in the prequel session, appear being chased by members of the City Watch. They claim that her mutation was that she had a 6th finger, and since they hadn't bothered to check on the boat whether she had 6 fingers, I decided that she had. This was just, a quirk, but in the kind of climate of mutants, a 6th finger was enough to suggest the taint of chaos. So Helga's sort of backed into a corner, and she sees the party and cries out for their help. And thankfully, their heartstrings were pulled sufficiently that they tried to intervene. However, Kirillith got a bit knife-happy and tried to assassinate one of the 4 watchmen. He failed with his knife-throwing roll. Funny that, against someone in a reasonable amount of plate armour. And so the party had to murder, for want of a better word, 4 officers of the City Watch. They were then spotted by a crowd who saw these people murdering the City Watch. They surrounded them, and Captain Shootsman, or whatever his name is, arrives just as Kirillith is trying to plant the Tzeentch book on one of the dead bodies. He's spotted, so that doesn't pan out well for them, and they are promptly arrested. And to really put the boot in, I had the good captain walk up and put his sword through Helga, which the party were quite upset about, but that was kind of the point. So the party is now under arrest, in possession of chaos materials and having murdered 4 members of the City Watch. And as they're being dragged off to the Watch Commander's keep, they are intercepted by the Archlector, who is the current senior priest of the Temple of Ulrich, who, unbeknownst to the party, is actually the main antagonist of the campaign, and he is secretly a Cornite cultist who has visions of demonic ascension, all this kind of stuff. So he's been orchestrating all this in the background. But at this point, he's only been helpful to the party, and he speaks to the Watch Commander and says, "No, I'll take them. This is a religious problem. These are chaos. We'll sort it. Don't worry." And the party is sort of getting nods and winks, thinking, "Oh yeah, we'll be all right." But they are taken to the Temple of Ulrich and cast unceremoniously into the dungeons, which was the end of that session. Session 5 saw the party locked up in the prison cells at the Temple of Ulrich. One of our party couldn't make it. The guy who played Ragnar was away that week on holiday, and so we had to devise an interesting reason as to why he wasn't there. We concluded that he had been the lippiest and therefore been taken off to be tortured. But Jon, the halfling outlaw, who hadn't been involved in the last session, was conveniently found in a jail cell. When we asked him how he'd ended up there, his response was cottaging. We chose not to pry much further into that one. So what we have is sort of deep, dark dungeons underneath the Temple of Ulrich. We have a number of prison cells, each one being occupied by a member of the party, and then a 6th cell, which is occupied but unbeknownst to the party at this point. So the campaign book is quite vague in, well, the party needs to come up with a convincing way of getting out of the jail cell. And what they managed to do was Kirillith, the thief, has not been caught before, so he was ill-prepared to deal with how to get out of jail. Basically, he rolled his I can't remember what test it was, but whatever test it was, to see if he had secreted a lockpick about his person. He failed, so he clearly wasn't prepared. Jon, however, did manage to hide a lockpick in the toughened skin of his halfling heel, which was gross, as he spent about 5 minutes picking away at the heel to get this little lockpick out. But he was able to pick the lock, and then he passed the lockpick, went round, and everybody was released. The only way out of the jails was through a door which went to the jailer's office, apartment, whatever you want to call it. Jon peered through the window and could see and or smell that the jailer was cooking something and was sort of getting settled in for the night. So the party came up with a scheme of basically just making a fuss, and then when the jailer got down, ambushing him and hopefully locking him in to one of the cells. As it turned out, Jon had other ideas. So he instigated contact with the jailer by opening the door and standing there looking at him. And when the jailer sort of came after him, he hopped back into the dungeon and hid behind the door. The jailer, who was actually quite a powerful character with lots of skills, with sort of wrestling and I don't know what the exact word is, but super strength and all that kind of stuff. It took all 5 of the party to pin him down and incapacitate him. Which was quite funny because they were all taking a bit of a beating here from this sort of unarmed, burly jailer type. But once they had managed to sort of beat this guy to submission, Jon made his way up to the jailer's office, grabbed the cooking pot that the guy had been making stew out of, poured it into bowls, and then caved the jailer's head in with the cast iron pot, which was pretty dark. And it came out of nowhere. Clearly, Jon was not in the mood for mucking about this session. And what was particularly amusing was he then pointed out that was the first kill his character had made in the campaign, which was quite funny. Anyway, having secured their release, they found that one of the prisoners, or the 6th cell, did indeed hold a prisoner, and it was one of the witch hunters who had been arrested during the sort of outrage at the mutant outbreak towards the tail end of the previous session, and the guy had a bit of a beating and had been tortured and whatnot. Anyway, he basically convinced the party to take him back to the Temple of Sigmar, where they would keep him safe. All of their belongings are found in a store cupboard, so they get all their weapons and armour back. But I had them, basically they'd been robbed, so all of their money had gone. I had hidden it under a squeaky floorboard behind the kitchen dresser, but none of them bothered to look for it, so they left something like, I don't know what it was, but it was a lot of gold coins lying about. The party was able to sneak back through Middenheim to get back to the Temple of Sigmar, where although there was a sort of mobbing crowd out the back, the witch hunter was able to sort of tell them a secret back door that led them into the temple proper. Once they were there, they got debriefed by a priest, whose name escapes me temporarily, Father something. So once they make it into the temple, the party realised that basically what was happening was that the Watch was inadvertently framing the Temple of Sigmar by arresting Jacob Bauer, who was one of the witch hunters, who was caught with a chaos tome in his possession, having allegedly, or rather actually, taken it from a chaos cult somewhere in the city. And the situation is quite bleak, because if he is found guilty, then the Temple of Sigmar will have no choice but to disown the witch hunters of the Ordo Fidelius, which would be quite catastrophic for the surviving party, as you can imagine. So the party were introduced to the High Capitular, whose name was Vernus Stolz of the Temple of Sigmar. He is tasked with defending Jacob's trial. The Capitular argues that without any evidence to support his claim, Bauer is screwed, and whilst the witch hunters are very keen to go out and get evidence, he also points out that if they are seen to be getting involved in any way, then that would basically be contaminated evidence, and they would all look even more guilty. So the High Capitular asks the party to retrace Bauer's steps and see whether there was any truth to his claims that there was a chaos cult nearby, which the party were reluctant to do. They keep asking about how much bounty they're going to receive for all these kind of good deeds that they're doing, and I had to keep sort of fobbing them off with excuses, but the price was set at, and I had no reason to stick to it. I had plans. Anyway, the trial is due to be held the next day, or in a couple of days' time, and it's a public affair, as all sort of heretic trials are in Middenheim. So the party have to get to work quickly. They follow the reported trail of Bauer back to a pub called the Sword and Flail, which, is quite chaosy in its own way. Anyway, they go in, and it all very quickly goes to pieces. The pub is the sort of pub that soldiers go to hang out because it's cheap, on the condition that they ignore all the devious shit that goes on in said pub. There's no furniture because it's all been smashed up, so there is a bar and a big empty space, and there's some locals who give the party the shifty eyes. Anyway, whilst the party sort of do some distracting, Jon went off on one of his own missions again, finds himself in an upside-down drunk room where the proprietor has basically nailed a load of furniture to the ceiling, and then when people are passed out and really hammered, he chucks them in this room, and they think they're upside down and they can't cope with it, and punters watch through little spy holes and wet themselves laughing as they see people flapping around trying desperately to get back to the floor. So yeah, Jon breaks through the ceiling and ends up in here before finding his way down into the cellar, where he moves some barrels after finding a hole, and he goes down the hole into the sewery, under-tunnel-y bit of Middenheim, where he is attacked by mutant cultists of Khorne. One of them's got sort of a dog head and fur and fangs, and another one's got sort of wolverine claws and clapping jaws and all this kind of stuff. Jon, being a halfling, wasn't best prepared for this, but he was, after taking a bit of a licking, he managed to get out of the pit. Because of the mutations, the cultists themselves couldn't actually leave the pen, which meant that Jon could improvise a way of dealing with them, which involved finding a crate of dwarven fire whiskey, pouring it down the hole onto the wolf dog mutant, and then setting it on fire, which was, I had to give the player credit for ingenuity, because that was a very efficient way of dealing with him. Lots of splash damage, and the guy with his wolfy coat caught fire. To cap it off, whilst the party are then dealing with the proprietor, who turns out to be a junior worshipper of Khorne. That was a messy fight. They come in to find Jon pissing down the hole onto the smoking remains of a Chaos Mutant, which I'd imagine would have been quite an odd scene. But anyway, the party ventured down into the lair of the cultists, and they hacked apart the remaining mutant and a few other bits and pieces that were in there. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that this was a cultist hotspot. They harvest some mutant bits, but crucially, they find a witness called Johann Opfer, who was kidnapped a few days before, but saw Jacob Bauer's raid on the cultist dungeon and can corroborate his story. So the party rescue him. Much to his pleasure, he was about to be sacrificed to sort of re-sanctify the altar. Although he doesn't know the name and can't give a description of the cult leader, he did say that he was massive and had a very commanding voice, which the party should have started to pick up on. And a few of them at this point were starting to raise questions about the Archlector. So anyway, as they're making their way back to the Temple of Ulrich, it becomes apparent that the trial has started early. The Deputy High Priest, Leibniz, has accelerated proceedings in an effort to kind of force this through. And so the party had to negotiate their way through the large crowd, which they did with varying methods and degrees of success. Roberto Don Pellegrino did a crowd surf and managed to get his way to the front whilst avoiding tomatoes and lettuces that were thrown at him. Jon has an unfortunate encounter with a small dog, which was quite amusing and comes back to haunt him later. And the rest of them sort of barged, and some of them had their pockets picked, some of them did pocket picking. But eventually they managed to get to the front, bribe a guard to get the High Capitular to come over. They present Johann to him, and the trial plays out in support of Bauer, and it's looking pretty good. The game's actually quite cool because it gives the GM either the opportunity to just sort of read through what happens, or the players can take on the role of different party members who are party to the trial, and there's a sort of handout and character guidance and stuff, and the party is supposed to act the trial out themselves. We kind of did halfway between both of those because we were conscious of time. We just kind of wanted to crack on. Anyway, it's all looking pretty rosy for Bauer at this point, until the Deputy High Priest brings out the icon of Sigmar that was stolen at the start of episode 1, and the High Capitular confirms that it is indeed a relic of Sigmar, and it's very important, and well done for finding it. And then Leibniz turns it round, and there is a mark of Khorne carved into the back. At the sight of this sort of blasphemy, and the idea that actually these Sigmarites are worshipping Khorne, the crowd goes berserk, and the soldiers are forced to kind of flee back to the palace, with the crowd baying for the blood of Bauer and basically anybody who was there. The party get mobbed up in this and find themselves in the palace with the party for the prosecution, the party for the defence, the judges, and the kind of important figures deciding this man's fate. It's all a bit standoffish. Leibniz gets a smack in the mouth, I think, from the High Capitular, which doesn't go down well, but seems to sort of validate his point that Maybe these Sigmarite types are not as trustworthy as they perhaps seem. At this point, the party a few of them had some fairly nasty wounds from fighting the Khorne cultists, but they were healed by High Capitula. After they settle in for the night, Father Ranulf, who is one of the linchpin characters of the story, comes to the party with a large wooden box, which they quickly recognise is the box that the Deputy High Priest had put the brass skull that they'd retrieved from the Beastman tomb in upon their return. And Father Ranulf wants you to take it to the Legio Theologica to have it sort of professionally destroyed, as he doesn't trust anybody else to deal with it. So in the middle of the night, the party sneak out the window by various means and hilariously try and break into the college. I made it as easy as possible for them, and they still ballsed it up royally. One guy managed to blag his way in through the front with some good charm checks. Somebody else clambered in through the ceiling, but one character, I forget which one it was, just failed spectacularly time and time and time again with all the different ways. And it got to the point where we just had to say, well, you find a sewer, you manage to direct yourself in, and you come up in the toilet, sort of train spotting style. Luckily, he was able to find a washroom, get himself cleaned and dressed in priestly robes. But yeah, it was getting quite sort of head scratching, going, you've failed all of the recommended ways of getting into the college here. What are we going to do with you? Anyway, the party meet up with a senior academic called Zweistein. I'm not sure, Zweistein. He agrees to take a look at the box. He opens it up and is rather disgusted to find that an actual human head is present. It's the head of Johann Opfer, who was the key witness in the trial of Jacob Bauer, which, as you can imagine, was a bit of a surprise, and it raised the question, well, who actually has the skull? I think the party at this point began to kind of realise that there was definitely something going on here. So the party had to then make their way back to the palace to report what they found to the Watch Commander Schützmann and High Capitula Stoltz, who are pretty shocked to discover that what's been going on. And when they go to confront Leibniz about it, he's not there. Surprise, surprise. And that pretty much brought the end to that session. Yeah, which was good. There was some interesting moments. I say Jon was on fire with his witty antics, but it was a nice setup for the final session, which essentially involved the party almost dying for about 2.5 hours. Leibniz has abandoned all pretences, made his way back to the Temple of Ulrich, and in the main hall in front of the Sacred Flame of Ulrich, he's performing a summoning ritual. The party they got kitted out and then basically sort of raced across Middenheim, dodging crowds and mutants and all sorts of things, reasonably successfully. But they make it to Temple of Ulrich. After climbing in through one of the top floor windows, they find themselves face to face with a member of the Brothers of the Axe, which are the elite of this unit within the Temple of Ulrich that Leibniz is ostensibly in charge of. But they're also cultists. He's been drawn in, and so have they. And they are absolute beasts. They've got full plate armor, so they were like toughness bonus of like 6, and everything that the party could throw at them, they might chip away a wound out of the 14 or 15 that they had, and it was getting quite desperate. Thankfully, they got a bit creative, and they were able to drop a very heavy chandelier on the one that was guarding the offices where they had snuck in. And then I think Jon probably did something abusive to it, but it did set the scene. They took a bit of a beating with one of them. And the book, he says that, when they enter the actual temple, there's 5 of them. And when I told him this, one of them was like, I'm out. And he proposed that he was just going to run. But at that point, I had Schützmann and the High Capitula Stoltz and a few soldiers turn up. So the party engage these Brothers of the Axe, and with a bit of help are able to eventually either whittle them down or subdue them. The High Capitula was casting these incredible spells that just vaporized one every 4 or 5 turns. It wasn't in the book, but the party were having such rotten luck with their dice rolls that I had to find some way of speeding things up a little bit. Otherwise, the actual confrontation at the end was never going to happen. In the book, there are 8 cultists that are being sacrificed by Leibniz, and each sacrifice takes 3 rounds. So they've got a reasonable amount of time, but because these things were just so damn hard to kill, it was a fairly close run thing. It didn't help when Jon accidentally, on purpose, we're not sure, killed one of the cultists and actually accelerated the process. But anyway, they engaged Leibniz, and although he himself was pretty tough as nails, they were able to defeat him. which was exactly what he wanted, because what happened next, as you can imagine, this being the finale of a campaign session, is a demon of Khorne appeared. Now, there was some debate as to what type of demon it was. It's not classified specifically, but it was the demon that was bound in the skull, with the hideously unpronounceable name. And basically, this thing is an absolute monster. It's got following profile. It's got weapon skill 55%, ballistic skill 45, strength 50, toughness 50, agility 55, intelligence 45, willpower 50, 15 fellowship, 2 attacks, 17 wounds, a strength bonus of 5, toughness bonus of 5, movement 4, a load of skills. Luckily, the only weapon it has is claws, but it's still hitting them on a D10 plus 5, and a few of the characters were sort of scattered across the room, not quite small pieces, but certainly with chunks taken out of them. That was until Rin, the elven boatman, steps up and with one incredibly lucky shot does something like 24 damage with one bow shot. He hit it in the head, then he rolled a 10, which is a critical, which means you get to re-roll as if you hit again. He rolled another 10 and then a 6. And then once we'd taken all the toughness bonuses out, we realised that this super mega demon end of game boss had literally just been one-shotted. And it was somewhat anticlimactic had it not been brilliant. So yeah, the Demon of Khorne was snuffed out. The Flame of Auric died, having been perverted by the summoning ritual. But the party had survived just, and a semblance of normality was able to return to Middenheim. There is scope for the party going about kind of righting a few wrongs, but we decided that we'd kind of, we were happy with the story as it was, and we didn't really feel like the characters needed to, or would have wanted to get involved in the kind of cleaning up operation that needed to take place afterwards. So yeah, that was the end of the Ashes of Middenheim campaign. It was 6 sessions. We did it over about 8 weeks, I think, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. When you've got a big group, it's not so bad if somebody has to miss a week. I think if you're running a party of 3 or 4, it becomes a bit of a problem. I'm not sure I would have wanted to do it with more than 6. At that point, players can become a bit bored when their character isn't doing much, or what they are doing is just repeating, oh, we're in combat again, are we? Okay, fine, I'll roll some dice. But yeah, the whole group are excited to get started on the next campaign, or the next part of the campaign, which is called Spies of Altdorf. Kirillith is actually from Altdorf, so that'll be really useful. It's a different kind of campaign, whereas Ashes of Middenheim is quite a linear adventure with the GM kind of saying, well, this happens and then this happens and this happens. The Spies of Altdorf is a lot more open-ended, and the party have real kind of free reign to tackle the problem as they see fit, and it's going to be a challenge for me as the GM to make sure that they don't lose their way, but at the same time they still feel like they are making the decisions here. So yes, I suppose my job is to give them the illusion of free will, as opposed to actual free will. It was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. Having proper campaign books makes a huge difference. I'm not up for hours and hours trying to think of how are my party going to derail this adventure I've spent ages coming up with. I need to think of some alternatives in case they choose X over Y, and so on and so forth. And yeah, getting them invested in a campaign with some good characters and then not having them killed off was good. I did kind of warn them that someone was going to die, and I was a little bit disappointed that nobody did, but equally there was a palpable sense of relief from the party when everybody made it through that final confrontation in one piece. So when we get to Spires of Altdorf, I will be sure to keep you posted. If you've got any questions about the campaign or the system, please let us know by the usual means. And yeah, that's pretty much it for episode 7 of the Dawn of Rebellion podcast. Thank you for listening. Next episode, we'll be taking a look at the new edition of the Middle-earth strategy battle game, which is the new name for Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Fantastic system in the days gone by, and it'll be really interesting to see how the new edition mixes things up and whether the improvements are for better or for worse. Fingers crossed for the better, because I love the game. It's a great system. And it'd be interesting to see if they can breathe some new life into it after at least a decade since the proper Lord of the Rings was released, and still a reasonable amount of time since the Hobbit editions were put out. But yeah, we shall see, and we'll do something with that next time. We're still going to do some stuff with X-Wing. We're waiting for 2.0 to kind of bed down a little bit. Our roving X-Wing reporter is off to a tournament soon, so we'll get some feedback from him on that. But yeah, so lots to look forward to. Now I'm back at work, there will be a bit of a slowdown in how quickly the episodes turn around. I'm going to aim for 1 a month. Over school holidays, it'll be a bit easier. I'll have a bit more time. But yeah, 1 a month is the plan. If we don't make it, we apologise. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon.